A man chooses, a slave obeys.
Welcome to the Ethics in Video Games podcast, where we explore issues at the intersection of ethics and video games.
What follows is a series of graphic, interactive scenes that we can't show you.
Okay, this is about tabletop role-playing game and consent within the tabletop role-playing game community and design. So it's not specifically about video games, but there are clear ties between video game designers and board game designers and tabletop game designers. So I think our podcast will reach both. And so let's talk about the ethics of consent. So here's what happened. About a year ago, in the springtime last year, a GM named Adam Coble, or Cable, I'm not sure how he pronounces his name. He was the GM for a popular streamed RPG called Far Verona. It takes place in some sort of Star Wars-like science fiction world. In the game, a player named Elspeth was playing an autonomous robot named Johnny, who had an expressed character goal to be more than a robot. Wanted to improve his robotic programming to include other things, right? It's a classic Pinocchio sort of tale. He wanted to be a real boy. The GM concocted this story moment at the end of season 2, in which the group of players met this dodgy backroom robotics guy who promised Johnny an upgrade. The upgrade turned out to be a code allowing robots to experience an orgasm, which this robotics guy triggered, so that Johnny had the first robotic equivalent to an orgasm. Basically, he had an NPC sexually assault a PC in his game.
Wait, so when you say sexually assault, explain that part.
All of this is fictional.
Right.
First off, all of this is virtual. They're playing over Zoom because we're in it's being streamed. People are playing from their own apartments, so nobody touched anybody inappropriately.
Right. This was streamed on Twitch, right?
I believe so. Yeah. This character Johnny is a robot, signed up to have this guy maybe give him some new code that allow him to do something that he couldn't do before, and that code ended up being, hey, now you can have an orgasm, and here's what it feels like.
Right. So it's not just that the GM made it so that there's a new capacity that the player's character has, but rather
Correct.
The GM forced the player to play as the character being forced to have an orgasm?
Correct.
Okay. And yes. Okay. And the sexual assault is that sex is happening to the player's character without their consent.
Correct.
Though it's interesting, right? No sex is actually happening. An orgasm is happening.
Right. Yes, but he actually described that there's video out there. People can go and look. He describes, like inserting the plug into a port there's
analogs.
There's more to it.
Right.
There's a whole analog, and he's pretty gleeful about it.
Right.
Like the GM is pretty gleeful about it. The rest of the people at his table are like, oh God.
Right.
What is happening?
I watched part of that video. Yeah.
Yeah. It's shocking, honestly. And one of the things that's sort of shocking about it is that this GM had been a very vocal proponent for the kinds of practices that have become standard, really, for trying to prevent this kind of thing from happening. So there's a handful of things that we do in tabletop role-playing games, because frequently we're playing at conventions, we're playing with strangers. It's been new. It's sort of new that we're playing now, videotaped and streaming out to the public where other people can watch us. That's sort of new. But, there have been bad moments, right? People have gotten into games and they've had experiences that were unbecoming of the gaming community, to say the least. Adam has since apologized, although it's still kind of unclear if he understands why this story moment was such a bad idea. Elspeth quit the game. The game disbanded. Which was a moneymaker for the company that was producing it. I only became aware of it recently because there's been further backlash against Adam from other writers and fans who are refusing to have their written work in a book alongside his written work. So there was going to be a book.
Okay.
There was a Kickstarter. Kickstarter got funded. It turns out, and it was a compilation book of a variety of different game master and game designers had written pieces for this book, and he was one of them. And when the other writers started to figure out, oh, he's one of them, and the guy running the Kickstarter was doing it in sort of a dodgy way too, like trying to hide the fact that Adam was part of the people.
Okay. Wow.
They started bailing. They started bailing out, and then so the guy ended up like taking down the Kickstarter and not producing the book.
Man. Okay. Yeah, we'll talk about the canceling part of this too. But
right, because that's a part of it. Right?
That is okay. Anyway, before that is really, really harsh, but I think. But before we kind of get to that, so I am, it's been a while since a long while since I've really played, these kinds of role-playing tabletop games. Back when I was playing these things, there weren't things like trigger warnings and questions of consent, and there certainly weren't orgasms in, I'm thinking of a Dungeons and Dragons game, and and orgasms being a part of it. So that was certainly
right.
Not a thing.
Honestly, right, and honestly, probably should never be. Like unless you're role playing a couple who is trying to become pregnant, and their travails, then maybe orgasms are not part of the story. Certainly, it wouldn't need to be part of any sort of story in a science fiction,
who
kind of world.
It could be fun. I think the question is consent, right?
Right. And so there are safeguards within the tabletop community now.
Okay.
Of which Adam was a proponent. So this is the crazy part about this, right? They're called lines and veils, and then there's the X card. So and I'll tell you about each of these things. A line is basically at the very beginning of the game, before you actually start playing. At the very beginning of the campaign, you say, "Here are the things that we're never going to cross this line," and then everybody describes all the lines that they don't ever want the game to be crossed. Right? They never say, typically it's never sexual situations, cruelty, horror, danger to children is a common one that people don't want to have crossed.
Okay.
And then at that point, the GM says, right, I'll never go there. A veil is something where you say, here are things that I don't want us. They're fodder for the story. They're okay as fodder for the story, but let's not get into like the nitty gritty detail. They're okay if they happen off screen, or they're okay if we sort of we don't go into like the details of them. So this is going to be things like, oh, I'm afraid of spiders. So it would be crazy not to like spiders. We're in a dungeon. There's going to be spiders, but let's not get into the details of like them crawling all over my face and their hairy little legs and things like that. Right. So just treat those with a veil.
Okay. All right.
And then there's the X card, which is, in a physical location. If you're sitting around a table playing, you would have a card on the table with an X on it. And if the story was going into a direction that somebody didn't like, they just reach over and they tap the X card.
Huh.
And everybody knows at that point to like stop, turn the story in a different direction, and play on.
And presumably from the context, you could figure out what exactly was it about the situation that was wrong, so you know which direction to turn it.
Right. And if you don't, then there can be some discussion. But typically, it's like and it gives people an out. Like this might be something triggering that you don't even realize is going to be triggering, but now it's triggering, and you don't. If you're going to talk about it, you're probably going to cry. So you don't want to talk about it. You just want it to go away.
Right.
You just tap the X card that goes away.
And so these are. It's interesting, right? Because the spider phobia is an interesting one, right? And sometimes phobias, as I understand, are some of these topics, along with, I'm assuming, sexism and racism and
That's right.
Stuff like that, graphic violence or extreme graphic violence. I wonder if you could have something where this sort of consent is given to player communities in video games in some sort of context, though
Right.
it's very hard to do on a mass scale.
Right. And so when you're thinking about this from a game designer's point of view, you look at his story as a warning case,
Right.
which is, basically don't pull the rug out from under your players. First off, there's two things, right? They didn't buy into orgasms in space, then don't bring in orgasms in space. In the case of like bringing this thought into video games, don't surprise players with something that seems out of genre. It's kind of, he was in space opera genre, he's in space opera genre, and now he's in porno genre. And that's a genre break, and that's going to make people feel really bad. They're going to.
Interesting, because the genre break also sounds like we're violating the magic circle as far as that goes.
To a degree, right? Because there's expectations. You're certainly violating my expectations.
Right. Though it's interesting, right? Because, I mean, sometimes part of the fun is, of course, playing against your expectations and coming up with something new. So does this mean that the player was supposed to enact the orgasm?
My take on it, from having watched it, is that Adam was trying to be edgy, and the player was supposed to feel like their character was in some ways harmed. He was trying to do a sort of a clever, well, you asked for this, and the genie is going to give it to you, but not in the way that you expect.
I see.
And he was also trying to, and it was pretty clear by how gleeful he was. He thought he was doing some sort of like, he's revealing the big twist, and everybody's supposed to be like super shocked,
right?
And like, oh my gosh, what an amazing twist,
right?
But that's not how people took that,
right? It's I mean, and you can give a big twist that plays with players' agency. Right?
That's right.
So a lot of it's interesting because a lot of this is respecting players' agency, right? And the idea of consent, and notice, right, we're not asking for consent for everything. Right. And we're assuming a lot of things are just coming with the context. So if you're playing a horror game and there's a big spiders start crawling all over your character, well, you're playing a horror game that fits within the genre, right? You don't, you may not need a trigger warning in the beginning, though, I know I'm really scared of spiders myself.
I'm so sorry about being so graphic then in my description.
And my wife is scared of snakes to the point where I just can't believe she's really that scared of snakes. But
it's real,
right? It's real, but it's not like if there's a game that suddenly had this, I would expect a trigger warning for her, at least on a mass release product.
Right. It would depend, right?
Yeah. How do we draw that line?
It would depend on how it's presented.
Right.
And that's another part of it too, right? Is how he presented it was so gleeful. It would be like, a My Little Pony game, and then all of a sudden there's snakes and they're really close to the screen.
Okay.
And he'd be like, all right, what just happened to me? Why did they just do this to me? It would be a breach of trust. Because, I mean, as any sort of creator audience relationship is to a certain degree a trust relationship,
right? Whether
Whether it's a novel, but in the case of a game, there's a little bit more because we're in this together. You and I, as a game designer, I'm giving you some agency. You're making choices based on the agency I'm giving you to give back to me, direction for you to go in different ways in the game. So all of that is there's this give and take.
And it's interesting how, right, the amount of, right, with these small groups, right, there's a sense where you have a lot more agency from the very beginning and you expect a lot more agency, but you're also a lot more connected to your character, right? I mean, you could be potentially acting out your character. Right? You're the physical manifestation almost of your character. Where it's interesting. Where in a video game, there's potentially a lot more distance between you and your avatar.
That's right. Yeah, because you don't have quite as much agency as you do in a tabletop role playing game. Let's talk about. So a couple of episodes ago, you had that I think the Dark Rain video.
Oh, Heavy Rain.
Heavy Rain, where he's chopping off his fingers.
Right.
The game designers have given you the choice of doing it, but not really, right?
Right.
You have to pull the trigger on it, but the story that they've set up is set up to where you have to do it. There's no other way around that, right?
You know, Andy, that actually isn't in one of our episodes. That was actually
Oh, it's not.
was actually in my classroom.
Where
you were subbing for me.
That's right, which was ethics in video games.
Right.
So
ethics of video games.
So there's
right.
all right. So there's this moment in Heavy Rain, a spoiler alert, where you're asked to cut off your own finger to save your child, and it's super dramatic, and they do a bunch of things to make it as dramatic as possible, and you have to do the thing yourself. You have to pull the trigger yourself on
and
it.
it was very intense for me when I did it, and I was a father at that point. I think my son was like 6 months old or something. And the whole game's about fatherhood. You know, actually, there's a better scene from Heavy Rain, I think, that relates to this. Sorry. Go.
Okay, yeah, go for it. I was just gonna say, so in that scene, you don't really have the agency. You're gonna have to chop off your finger.
Right.
But the story has given you lots of reasons to do it.
Right.
And also given you the ability to do the deed yourself.
So it's interesting, yeah. So and it's hard to find a problem with that. But
right, there's no problem with that.
But then there's another scene in Heavy Rain, which is so one thing about Heavy Rain that's interesting is you play 4 different characters, right? And one of them is Madison Page. And she's like a journalist. And I think the scene where you're introduced to her is
the shower scene.
Right. So, you know, she wakes up or she comes back from work. I can't remember, right? But you're in her apartment. You take a shower, not the first time you ever take a shower with a character. And in fact, I think you might take a shower with the male character in the beginning or something like it, alluding to it. But then you are in your underwear and your tank top, and you're in your home when there's a break-in. And the break-in seems, sexualized because you're in your panties and your tank top. It seems that they are going to rape and kill you. And and that came out of nowhere for me. But also I found, and I remember reading about this reading about it on some gaming website where they criticized this very heavily in terms of using rape as a storytelling device for no reason, just to titillate the male player, and
which seems very, very similar to what Adam was doing. Clearly,
and I can see that, though in this particular situation, for me, it was a super interesting experience of being in the position of a woman that is potentially being sexually assaulted. Now, at the end, they don't make you go through the experience. But, I mean, I could definitely see how. So what happens is, I think they kill you rather than rape you, which is better. Right?
Okay,
Yay,
sure.
right?
But at the same time, you don't have any agency over this.
You have no agency and no warning, right? Again, I thought for me the experience was positive because I got to kind of feel what it's like, as only games can do, right? Have that experience. But I think of, if I was someone who might be triggered by that.
Right. What if you had already had that experience?
Right. How incredibly harming that can be.
And so many women have.
Right.
So what that basically is saying is, hey, this game, and you were not given any warning that this would happen. Like you would not know buying this game that you were potentially going to be attacked.
And notice, right? What would you say in the beginning for trigger? This game contains sexual violence.
Yeah.
Right. Though it's interesting, right? It's not like containing sexual violence, like let's say, Rape Day contains sexual violence, or Rape Day contains, right?
It doesn't matter. You've got to warn them. You've got to tell people what they're in for.
Which is interesting because again, right? It's more like sexualized violence. There's never a rape. it's never even an explicit threat of a rape, but the context kind of makes it clear that it would be that. But if all you have is sexualized violence, I mean, Jesus, sexualized violence is everywhere.
Well, right.
Now,
yeah, well, and can you imagine how horrible it must be?
Well, but
for somebody who has suffered that.
But there's sexualized violence in the sense of rape themes. And there's sexualized violence in the sense of, we're playing
Soul Calibur or any of those.
What are those games, right? Where the violence is sexualized.
Right. But at the same time, in those games, you are given lots of agency.
Yeah.
The violence, you're dishing it. I mean, you're dishing it out as equally as you're getting it.
Sure, but it doesn't need to be that way, right? So I can have a game,
Sure.
where.
No, I agree. But I just feel the context is very different than when you're presented as powerless,
right? Definitely
in a game versus powerful. In Soul Calibur, I feel powerful even when I'm playing the female characters,
right? Because they are powerful, right?
They are powerful,
but
right?
It's also but the term sexualized violence isn't appropriate, I think, for these games. Just do two different things. They do two different things, but I would use the same words for both of them. You would? You think sexualized violence applies for both?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I can see that, but not as a warning, let's say, or not as something I would have on the label.
And maybe I should defer to somebody who has experienced it to say, what would be a better warning for them? Because I've never experienced it, so I don't know. Perhaps I'm not the best person to decide what the warning should be.
But right, it seems that if we're following this tabletop example, right, right, this Madison scene in Heavy Rain really does seem to be the kind of thing that you would think requires some way for you to buy into it. Right?
Somebody's tapping that X card very hard when this is happening, right? They're tap, tap, tap. Nope, I don't want this to happen. This is bad. I don't want this to happen. This needs to stop.
But of course they can, put the controller down, right? And have it stop in that way, right?
Right. People can get up from the table and leave, but that's the point of these. That's the point of these safeguards, is not to run people away from our hobby.
Right. I mean, Heavy Rain is a brilliant game, right?
We don't want. Why would you want half of the people to get up in disgust halfway through your game?
Right. Okay. So can we get to the other part here, which is the
cancel culture
part of it? Yeah. It's so here's kind of my thing about Adam. Right. Context is really important. The fact that he clearly was someone, he's playing a game. Does he make it as he go, or is this something that he wrote ahead of time?
Well, I mean, with a tabletop role-playing game, you write as much as you can ahead of time, and then you react to players' actions.
Right.
And so, clearly this was something that he had planned. So
right?
this was clearly a planned moment.
Okay, right. So you take these things into consideration, right? Was it a planned moment, right? Or was it just something that you're ad-libbing? You're taking the context into the situation, right?
He might have been. I don't know whether it was an ad-lib or a planned moment.
He might have thought, hey, I just had this great idea, right? Without having time to reflect on it. Or maybe he just reflected on it and he just didn't see the potential downside to it. It's and
that's where people like me get in trouble.
Part of the issue here, I think, is this issue about forgiveness, and that we're really good. And I think about this not just in the context, obviously, of this, but we're really good at holding people accountable, demanding justice, and we really suck at forgiveness. It's very hard for us to make apologies. Because whenever someone makes an apology, it's taken not as a sign of real contrition and an idea that we can grow through it, but an admission of guilt.
Yes and no, right? I think that's true in a larger sense, but within the tabletop gaming community, I think that because he did apologize, and he apologized. His first apology was actually pretty contrite, although it wasn't super clear that he knew exactly what had happened that had caused it all to melt down. But he was very sorry that it had happened, and he was very sorry that he hadn't because he hadn't put those safeguards in place, and he was very sorry that he hadn't put those safeguards in
I
place.
see.
But he still wasn't super clear that he understood what the at the moment crime was.
Right.
The harm that he actually caused was. And then since then he sort of went silent for a while, and then he came back and he posted another apology kind of thing, but it was like in a longer thing where he spent a lot more time talking about how bad it's been for him.
Okay.
And very little time talking about, right. And so that wasn't taken very well. He's since gone silent again. And, who knows what'll happen with this guy. He'll be fine. I mean, but, it didn't help him that the crime that was the exact thing that he was sort of so purportedly against.
Right.
Like, it's like and I get it. I was 27 once. We're all imperfect. We all have these moments. We all have these like, wow, that was a really dumb idea. I've done that, and thankfully I didn't do it publicly.
Right. I hope he gets forgiven. I hope it's back, and I hope his positive contributions keep growing.
Good podcast.
GP. All right, play nice. You can subscribe and listen to all of our episodes wherever you listen to podcasts.